Good day to you. It really is kind of crazy to me that so many Americans, I'll come back to that term in a few moments, so many Americans make a kind of pilgrimage to Disney World in Florida before they die. They've got to drive to Disney World. And yet they can't name the person who is the Prime Minister of Canada, which is a shorter distance to the north, the prime minister of the second largest country, the prime minister of the country that is our biggest trading partner with the United States, the prime minister of the country that is mostly English speaking. Most people cannot name the prime minister of Canada. Maybe you can, Justin Trudeau, Justin Trudeau. Maybe some of you can, but we can't name that prime minister primarily because we're not really exposed to that info in our mass media system. We hardly ever have Canada covered in our mass media. And that is at the essence, in some ways, of the problems in the relations between Canada and the US when we talk about media crossing borders. So this serves as our intro for class today. We're talking about that big, friendly, northerly white neighbor, the great white north, as they call it, snow, to the north of us, a 6.5 hour drive, and where they drink beer and have mooses in the streets and have maple syrup, and hockey is on everybody's television. Everybody says, "Eh." Those are our stereotypes of Canada, right? I actually have taken this class to Canada many different times. We've gone to both Toronto and to Montreal, where we have visited Canadian media. Of course, that was before the pandemic, and I know quite a bit about Canada from those trips. So I'll be throwing in some stuff as we discuss Canada today, and we know when we read the chapter readings on Canada, that there has been an issue, a sticking point between Canada and the U.S. has been around for a long time. It's essentially imperialism, American imperialism. I said I would come back to you about that word. Let's come back to it right now. Are you an American? Yeah. Is a Canadian American? Yeah. Is a Mexican an American? Technically, yeah, because American comes from North American. So if you want to identify yourself, actually a Brazilian is an American. A Costa Rican is an American because they're all from America. It just happens to be South America, Central America. So right there points out some of the egocentrism that goes along with our culture and assuming that we sort of are at the center of things. And Canada is very wary of the media products that we produce crossing over too much over the Canadian border at too much of a volume, too many of them, and too frequently into Canada, so that the Canadian culture starts getting threatened and dissipated. And in the case of this chapter, the economy is not able to grow as it could because of Canadian media products and the potential that they hold. So imperialism is all about invasion, right? And American imperialism is about invasion of our media products into Canada. 90% of the Canadian population lives along the border. And so most people are right there on the U.S. You can't stop a radio signal from Detroit, Michigan coming over into Canada. You can't stop that from Buffalo, New York. It's part of the problem. So Canada has actually said we're going to respond to this in some ways, not just by playing the victim and saying, oh, the U.S., we need to stop the U.S., we need to put quotas on how many songs can be played on Canadian radio that are U.S. American versus Canadian, and they actually do that. They have quotas on how many songs have to be Canadian. 35% is the max U.S. songs that can be on Canadian radio. But aside from that, Canada says instead of being a victim and trying to control stuff coming in, we need to get out in front and we need to export ourselves. We need to really market Canadian TV, Canadian film. So most of the chapter is about that. It's about the economics of how Canada does that. It's about, in essence, the globalization of Canadian cultural industries. When we look at film production and television production, those are cultural industries. They are producing ways of living. They are producing values. They are producing relations between people and how people get along. That's what we say when we're talking about producing culture. And in fact, Canadian TV today is very, very strong. As you see from the chapter, you see there's lots of hits and lots of shows that are very, very popular that are coming out of Canada. Some of those hits are listed for you in there. You got Degrassi is a show that many kids saw. It used to drive me crazy when my daughter was watching it. It got Corner Gas. It got Little Mosque on the Prairie. You may or may not know about these shows. They're very popular across the world. Canada has successfully used the creation and marketing of those to make money. It all started, this issue, with a 1949 report. Going back to 1949, this issue of Canada trying to protect its culture and at the same time strengthen its media export market. In 1949, there was a government commission report that basically said that the United States was a kind of a behemoth, and that was just flooding the Canadian border with with American ideology, American values coming across. And so the Canadian report actually became like a rallying cry for Canada as a nation. Hey, we can't let the United States do this. We have to, it's the small guy against the Goliath, the David versus the Goliath. And that actually rallied the country behind the idea of building up the Canadian media industry, as well as getting funding on the part of Canada. And so Canada today actually puts a lot more money into its broadcasting entities than we do. We have PBS, we have NPR, National Public Radio, public broadcasting system in the US. They have a tiny budget compared to the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. When I took my students to Canada, to Montreal, to see the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, we went to the basement, and in the basement they have sets that they use to build for shows. They can make a farmhouse. They rebuilt Saigon in Vietnam for one of their shows. You know how big the space was? 28 football fields. 28 football fields! That's how big the underground space was at the CBC just for sets. That shows you how much money is being put in to public broadcasting in Canada, and that's because of this rallying cry. Hey, we can't let the U.S. snuff us out. And so Canada today is, in a bigger context, is a mighty country. They have the 10th largest economy in the world. There's about 200 countries in the world. They have the 10th largest. But like the United States and other countries across the world, they're kind of suffering from few players owning most of the media properties. In fact, just a handful big media companies, BCE, British Columbia, and I don't know what the E stands for on that. Rogers is another one. Shaw is another one. Quebecois is another one. That's a whole other dimension of Canada. It's got the province of Quebec, which is French speaking. And so you got to produce TV content, radio songs, web pages, everything in the French language for that. And then how is that, those French speakers, do they take in English content as well? You have to supply them with bilingual content, some people. Increasingly, Canadians like the United States, like U.S. citizens, are cutting the cord, so to speak, getting rid of that giant cable bill and streaming their programs, taking them in. But despite the effort of the Canadian government of trying to strengthen Canadian exports and putting restrictions on how much U.S. programming can come in, there still is a big lopsidedness when it comes to that information flow, which we talked about last time. Which direction is the information flowing? And let me illustrate it for you here. The book does this as well. The top 10 English-speaking TV shows in Canada were American. The Hollywood films take about 94 to 99% of box office receipts, 94 to 99%. The top 15 websites that were visited by Canadians are all American. So you see the lopsidedness that you're up against. And yet Canada has a really robust export industry in many ways. You've got the dimension of Canadian sites being used for Hollywood movie sets. So you have Hollywood coming across to Toronto, coming into Montreal, shooting films there, and Toronto offering tax incentives so that crews that come here taxed less. They get tax breaks to stimulate the economy of Toronto and get those people here. So we have that's very robust. They're great places to shoot in Montreal and Toronto. They offer many advantages. But we also have Canada with studios in other countries. Canada with TV studios producing TV programs and film and video and songs in studios across the world, as far places as Hong Kong and all across Asia, really. So you have that going on as well. And then you have Canada increasing its own production domestically of TV and film by providing, again, tax incentives, by giving grants, by establishing channels. You know, the CBC has an outpost, if you want to call it, all across Canada, yet another wrinkle in what makes Canada unique is it does have all this countryside, all this land that is vastly inaccessible because it's ice. And yet you do have these small communities. So Canada has established the CBCs so that these communities have contact with modern day civilization and can learn about the state of affairs. So you can say that the Canadian state has been a boon, BOON, has been a boon to TV and radio in Canada. It's if not for the Canadian state funding, providing incentives, rallying the Canadian media industries and the population against essentially the United States and Britain to some extent, it wouldn't be as robust. And it is a robust industry, and it puts out Justin Bieber, and it puts out Shania Twain and Jim Carrey and lots of stars that we have in our media that you don't even really think about because they're Canadians that have taken on kind of American personalities. And then finally, Canada has also exercised protections against free trade. We do have these free trade agreements across the globe. This country gets to trade with this country without having taxes put on it. Like if you bring in a chair, actually this chair here is from a Canadian furniture company. And when we brought it in, I remember we had to pay a tax on it that made it cost more because it's an import from Canada. So to take all that away, to take away those taxes is free trade. Just hey, let it happen. But Canada's opposed to that. Canada's no, we're not going to do that. We are going to tax other media properties, media content coming into our country because we want to make it more difficult, less profitable for them to come in because we want to give our own industry, our own Canadian media industries a chance to be stimulated without having too much competition from abroad. So that then wraps up our great big neighbor, the second largest country to the north, Canada. Have a great day.